Well, greetings and welcome to the Dividing Line. We're going to dive right into our topic today because, at least for the first 45 minutes or so, we don't have to talk about Marxists or Crusaders or anything else because we have as our special guest Dr. Jason Lisle. I almost wrote up something along the lines of smarter than a speeding AI mainframe. Rising earlier than your 16-year-old teenage son. People don't get that part if they don't realize you're an astronomer, so you just live in the dark. But anyways, I didn't get a chance to finish writing all that up. So anyways, a very patient man, too. I mean, I drove up to Colorado Springs a few weeks ago, and we got together for Mexican food. And the poor guy had to sit there while I once again told to someone who had never heard it before the whole story of how I got my wife in the Battle of Midway. And he listened very patiently to the whole thing, and I appreciate that. And I'm almost afraid to ask, do you know the four carriers we sunk at Midway, Jason?
No. I'm not even going to guess.
The Akagi, the Kaga, the Sri, and the Hiryu. But anyways, yes, a story I've told many times before, but and he knows it all as well. But the whole reason is that we're going to have Jason on today is an article that you can find at biblicalscienceinstitute.com. It's still toward the top of the list, though above it are articles on dealing with flat earthers and their arguments from Scripture. Which again, I've told people whenever I run into a flat earther, I just go read Jason Lisle, and I walk away because I can't do it. There's certain things you just walk away from, and God has gifted you, brother, with with great patience, I guess, in dealing with that subject. But anyways, Jason was telling me he seemed rather excited as astronomers can get about things in life. About the the article on your website is more of a popular level version of it.
It is, yeah.
Okay. So it's called New James Webb Space Telescope Observations Challenge the Big Bang. It was put up there on August 2nd. And so I would encourage everybody to go to Biblical Science Institute, all one very long, almost Germanically long word, because Germans love just cramming words together until they're like 3 paragraphs long. But biblicalscienceinstitute.com, New James Webb Space Telescope Observations Challenge the Big Bang. And so Jason explained this to me in person in the dark. Okay, so we were in the dark next to a graveyard. Now, when you put all that together, it sounds really, really weird, but it's really, really not. We were just as far away from city lights as we could get. And so there's a certain part of it that once we get to it, I'm going to have to go, okay, that's where I get lost. But I'll let you know when we get there. Give us a summary and where we should start and why we, obviously you think this is very, very important. And we've got a lot of homeschoolers, by the way. I know that one of our board member guys was saying that the program today is going to be on the homeschool menu. And so we've got folks listening live, and they're all excited about having Jason Lisle on the program. So I hope that pressure doesn't, make you cave or anything like that. But what about this do we need to know, and how do we get started in understanding where you're coming from?
Okay, well, I probably should back up and give a little background information. This all pertains to the James Webb Space Telescope, and this was launched back in 2022, kind of as the successor to Hubble.
Right.
And its design is different from Hubble. It's bigger. and it's able to see wavelengths that Hubble can't see. Hubble has kind of the same range as us. It sees visible wavelengths. It can go a little into the ultraviolet, little into the infrared, a little beyond human vision. But the James Webb Space Telescope is designed to see deep infrared, mid to, well, they would call it near to mid infrared. And those are wavelengths that are too broad to be seen by human eyes. And the reason it's designed that way is galaxies that are very far away in space, for whatever reason, their light is redshifted. That is, the wavelengths have been stretched. And at a certain point, even if they were bright enough, human eyes couldn't see them anymore. It's beyond our range to detect. The James Webb Space Telescope can detect those. And therefore, it can see galaxies that are much farther away than the Hubble Space Telescope, or really anything we have that's ground-based. And it's designed to do that. And it's up in space. It's at a distance about 1 million miles away in space. And again, it was actually launched December. It was launched Christmas 2021. And in January of 2022, I thought I'd better make some predictions about what this thing is going to see, because the Big Bang folks, the folks who believe in that the universe just kind of exploded into existence billions of years ago, they have their expectations as to what distant galaxies should look like based on that secular worldview. I'm a biblical creationist. I have an advantage. I've got God telling me how he created the universe. And that gives me better insight into what distant galaxies should look like. And so back in January of 2022, I made 3 predictions as to what the James Webb Space Telescope should detect. And basically, I predicted that it'll detect galaxies that are much farther away than the secularists were predicting. They predicted that galaxies should end at a distance corresponding to a redshift of 14. That means the light's been stretched out like 14 times. There should be any galaxies after that, because in their view, you're looking back in time, and there's a time when there weren't any galaxies. See, I would reject that view, and I would say, no, we're seeing the universe as it is, and I don't see any reason why God stopped creating galaxies at a certain distance, so I think they're going to keep going. The secularists predicted that these galaxies would be baby galaxies, low mass, low luminosity. I predicted they'd be similar to nearby galaxies, fully designed, fully mature galaxies, not clumpy baby galaxies. And I predicted that these galaxies would have heavy elements in them, things like oxygen and carbon. And in July of 2022, James Webb Space Telescope poured back its first data, and we saw that the biblical creation predictions were right, where they found galaxies way beyond a redshift of 14, some going out to apparently a redshift of 20, which puts it within a few 100 million years of the Big Bang in the secular view. They shouldn't be there. They shouldn't be there. And the galaxies that they see were not baby galaxies, but fully formed, designed galaxies, just like I would expect as a biblical creationist. And they detected heavy elements in these galaxies. So I was very pleased with that. So that all led up to then this new discovery, which I wasn't really expecting either. Nobody was really expecting this. And that is the fact that there's a magnification effect. If the universe is expanding the way the secularists believe, and the way I had believed until very recently, it creates kind of a magnification effect where galaxies should start to look bigger at a certain distance, because you're looking back to a time when the universe was smaller, and therefore the galaxies take up a larger proportion of that space. And so when I first examined these data from the James Webb Space Telescope, I did not see this effect where distant galaxies should look bigger and bigger and bigger. They continue to look smaller, as our intuition would expect. And so that made me think to maybe this idea that the fabric of space is expanding is wrong. Okay. And so that's when I went through the math and looked at these things. So
okay, so that's where I fall off the wagon, because when you said they get to a certain point and then they're going to start to look bigger,
mm-hmm.
But why? Because you said that it had something to do with the universe being smaller or something. That's where I'm like, if it's farther and farther away, you said, intuitionally we'd figure it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Right. So why wouldn't it get smaller and smaller and smaller? Can you explain that, or am I just my IQ is not there?
I'll try that. It's counterintuitive, because the geometrical effect is the farther away something is, the smaller it looks. What we would call its angular diameter. That's how big something appears in the sky. The sun and the moon have approximately the same angular diameter. Now, in reality, the sun's 400 times larger than the moon, but it's also 400 times farther away. So their angular size is the same.
Hmm.
And if you were to push the moon farther away, if you push it twice as far away, it looks half as big. Now that works even for galaxies up to a certain point, and it would work forever if the fabric of space is not expanding. But if space is expanding like a balloon, then there's another effect that kicks in that would cause things to look bigger. And maybe the analogy, I keep trying to think of a way to explain this to layman. I don't know if this will work, but let's try this. Imagine you have a circle, and imagine you draw a galaxy at 6 different points on the circle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So I've got these galaxies and there's space between them, right? So the galaxies, each one of them takes up a small, we can imagine I'm in the middle of the circle looking at those galaxies. Each one would take up a certain amount of space in the sky, the number of degrees. The total number of degrees in a circle is 360. Each galaxy would take up a few degrees. But if you shrink the circle, if space itself were smaller in the past, then pretty soon it would get to a point where the galaxies would all be touching, wouldn't they?
Right.
They would take up 100% of the 360 degrees. And so you see everywhere, from my perspective in the middle, everywhere I look, I would see a galaxy because they would all be touching. They would look very big. So maybe that's the way to explain it. If the universe was smaller in the past, then galaxies would be taking up a proportionally larger amount of space, assuming they remain the same size, to where eventually they would take up all the space. And so they would look very big. So this effect only kicks in if space itself is expanding, and only if you look far enough. And when you go through the math, it turns out that at a redshift of about 1.6, where the light's been stretched out 1.6 times, that corresponds to a distance. At that distance, the decreasing size due to perspective will be more than compensated by the magnification effect. And so galaxies should start to look larger and larger at a redshift of 1.6 and continue to look larger forever as you go out farther into space, because the universe was smaller and galaxies are taking up a larger proportion of that space. So does that kind of make sense?
So I'm gonna ask Rich. Would you like to summarize that for me? See.
So you're saying.
Okay, so here's where we're just going to have to take it on the authority of the eminent astrophysicist and all-around good guy, Jason Lisle, because I'm hearing what.
I've got it.
What?
So you're saying that space is really big. I got it.
It is.
And it's the final frontier. Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure what it's like to be Jason and have to live with all of us cretins around him all the time. But I think that's why he's a Trekkie, because it doesn't matter which series you're watching. You've got Spock, you've got Data. He's got people he can talk to. They're the small minority, but he's got people he can talk to. So, okay, so I don't understand why, but the standard cosmological assumption that is being used in astrophysics and astronomy and so on and so forth has to do with an expanding space, and therefore what Webb should see is these galaxies that are farther and farther away should not be getting smaller and smaller. They should be, to us, appearing larger the farther away they are.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's something that I learned in grad school, and I learned how to calculate it. And and this is something that basically all secular astronomers, just about all of them, would agree upon. And until recently, I would have agreed with that too. I would have said, yeah, space is expanding like a balloon and the galaxies just go along for the ride. Now, the secularists would say, they would extrapolate that back based on the assumptions of uniformitarianism and naturalism. They would say no supernatural creation and all things have been like they are now. So you run that balloon backwards, it eventually goes back to a point, and based on its current speed of expansion, it would take billions of years to go back to a point. That's where they get the idea of the Big Bang. The idea of expanding universe was discovered in the 1920s by 4 different physicists. And the math that describes this expansion is named after those 4 physicists. It's the Friedmann, Lemaitre, Robertson, Walker metric. Metric describes kind of what defines distance in space.
Mhm.
And so they independently discovered this in the 1920s. And then Edwin Hubble in 1929, he was an astronomer who was measuring the redshifts of galaxies, which he interpreted as speed. If they're redshifted, they're moving away from us. The more redshifted, the faster they're moving away. And he found that the farther away a galaxy was, he measured their distance too, and he found that the farther away a galaxy was, the more redshifted it is. And we now call this the Hubble law, that the redshift is proportional to distance. And these four one of the physicists, Lemaitre, recognized, well, that would make sense if the universe is expanding like a balloon, because if you draw a bunch of points on a balloon, 2 points that are really close to each other as you blow up the balloon, they move slowly apart. 2 points that are farther away on the balloon as you blow up the balloon, they move quickly apart. And so this expanding balloon would explain the Hubble law. And a lot of physicists jumped on board. And so since 1929, really, that has been the standard explanation for the Hubble law, is that the reason that galaxies are more redshifted the farther away they are is because the fabric of space is expanding like a balloon, and that just kind of carries the galaxies along for the ride. So you think of the galaxies as stationary dots on a balloon that's expanding, but that would create this magnification effect where galaxies beyond a redshift of 1.6 should start to look progressively larger with distance. And I know how to calculate that. This is in the standard literature. And when looking at the James Webb Space Telescope data, I didn't see that. And so late last year, November or so last year, I did the calculations and said, how big should these galaxies look quantitatively? Because it's one thing to look and say, well, they don't seem to be getting bigger, but I wanted to see if the numbers bore that out. And then I compared different literature where they had measured the angular diameters of these galaxies to see if it best fits an expanding universe or one where the galaxies are just moving away from each other, but the fabric of space is not expanding.
Okay.
And those create two different effects.
Okay, so I'm not sure if you can do anything with this or not, Rich, but there is a graphic in the article that illustrates at least where we've gotten so far with some galaxies here. I'm not sure if you can. Yeah, there we go. And so this is the graphic you have, Jason, in the article showing the galaxies getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and then that's on the top, and then on the bottom, yes. Large, small, large type of a situation, depending on our where we are. So
yes, yeah.
Okay.
So the top would be if space is not expanding, galaxies would continue to look smaller and smaller with distance, just as you expect. Right. And then on the bottom would be if space is expanding, galaxies will look smaller and smaller out to 1.6, and then they'll start to look bigger again.
Okay. All right. So there's that. So you're looking at the data, and so there you have two graphs here. The one doesn't have the stuff on it. The other does. So I guess we can start with the one that. Oh, I'm not sure why it did that. So this first graph that you have. Well, why is it doing that to me?
I can display it here if it would be helpful.
Okay, all right. Rich says that's probably better on our end if you did it there. Yeah, okay, there we go. That looks better than what I've got here anyways. So that tell us what we're looking at here.
Okay, so the red line is the expected angular diameter of an average sized galaxy as a function of redshift. So the chart at the bottom there, it's 1 through 10. It actually goes farther than that. It's a logarithmic plot, so the lines get closer together. But that's how big a galaxy should look at different distances. And you can see it reaches its smallest size at about 1.6. The chart starts at 1. And you can see it's getting a little bit smaller. And then at 1.6, it reaches the smallest value. And then the galaxies get bigger and bigger and bigger after that. Now, the yellow line is what I predicted. If space is not expanding at all, then galaxies should just continue to look smaller and smaller as a function of redshift. And you have to compute what their distance is compared to that redshift and then calculate the angular diameter. So you can see with the yellow line, galaxies continue to look smaller and smaller, just as you'd expect intuitively, with an increase in distance.
Okay.
And then I also
wait. Okay. The green line I like because I'm getting old. So I want to hear about the tired light model.
Yes. The tired light model was invented by Fritz Zwicky back in 1930 something. And basically, his idea was it's a different explanation for the redshifts. Before then, people thought redshifts are caused by galaxies either moving through space, a Doppler effect, a Doppler shift, or space expanding, and that stretches out the light. Zwicky thought, well, maybe light just loses energy with time. And so the galaxies that are the farthest away, their light's been traveling the longest. And so the light just kind of gets tired. It loses energy over time. And now the problem with that, there was never really any good explanation as for what would cause that. So
well, until you get over 60, and then it's just sort of natural.
Right? Yeah.
I like the tired light model. That's
yes, but light is not subject to the curse in the same way that we are. So light shouldn't use energy, and in fact, the principle of the conservation of energy should require light to maintain its energy. Whatever energy it starts with, it has to keep that or transfer it to something else. And Zwicky thought maybe it got transferred gravitationally to these galaxies, but it never really had a good physical bearing, and it predicted a kind of blurring effect with distance, which we do not see.
Okay.
The galaxies in James Webb Space Telescope data are perfectly crystal clear. So I don't think the tired light model is right, but I wanted to include it for the sake of comparison because it also predicts that galaxies should continue to look smaller because in their view, this universe is not expanding either, nor are galaxies moving in their view in the tired light model. So I just wanted to include that for the sake of completion.
Okay, before we look at the next one that has the data plugged into the graph, what is the because in your article you explain this, the Big Bang cosmology is wedded to certain assumptions that are reflected in this graph. So explain how that's relevant.
So the Big Bang assumes not only that the fabric of space is expanding, which until recently I thought was at least plausible, but it also assumes naturalism and uniformitarianism. Naturalism is the belief that nature's all there is, and so it excludes any kind of supernatural miracle. And I'm sure you've run into naturalists where no matter what kind of miracle, the miracles of Christ, they would say, well, there's a natural explanation for that. They'll give you some kind of explanation for it. And you can always do that. You can always explain away the supernatural by insisting on a presupposition that everything that happens must be natural. Now, I would reject that presupposition because it's unbiblical. And then the other presupposition is that past rates and conditions are like present rates and conditions, that all things have continued as they were from the beginning of creation, something that the Apostle Peter predicted that people would believe in. So, and that's basically that the expansion rate has always been like it is today. And so neither of those are necessarily true, but whenever you hear somebody claim that this evidence proves an old universe or an old Earth, they've always invoked those two assumptions, always. And those are anti-biblical assumptions. So they've assumed the Bible's wrong at the outset in order to argue against the biblical timeline, which really is kind of circular. So naturalism, uniformitarianism, those are two assumptions that have gone into that.
Okay, so you said you got the data and you put it in the graph, and once you did that, did you sleep well that night? Did you not sleep that night? What happened?
I was very excited when I plugged the data in. So again, here are the graphs. If the Big Bang's true, the average angular diameter of a galaxy should match the red line. If space is not expanding, but the galaxies are simply moving through it, then the yellow line, the data will fall along the yellow line. That would represent the average angular diameter of galaxy. And so let's plug in the actual data. Here are the average galaxy sizes as recorded by different scientists using the James Webb Space Telescope data. So I used their measurements and plugged them in. And sure enough, the galaxies, you can see the galaxies get smaller and smaller with distance, as our intuition would expect. The magnification effect is not there. The data match almost perfectly what we would expect if the fabric of space is not expanding, but the redshifts of galaxies are simply a Doppler shift. And so what that indicates is the Big Bang is wrong. It indicates that there's a new cosmology, one that I hope I think should be creation-based, and that galaxies are simply moving through a space that is itself rather static. So I slept very well that night. I was excited. I was excited. So once I got to sleep, I slept very well.
Yes, yes, yes. So I see there was one set of data that looked like the tired light model. So I'm still going to put in a one yay for the old tired light model. So Rich and I are like, oh yeah. So, all right. So now you have published this in a journal, but it's not a secular journal, right?
Right. And I considered publishing in a secular journal, but I wanted to highlight the creation implications of this. And so I want other creationists to be aware of this. And if the secularists want to learn about this, they're going to have to start reading our journals. Is basically the bottom line. So I think that creation journals should have the latest and best science, because we're doing it from a proper biblical perspective, and as a result, we tend to get the right answer. So I thought that was kind of fun. But I published it in the Answers Research Journal, which is it's a peer-reviewed journal that's published by Answers in Genesis. And we had a number of creation astronomers and physicists look at it, and approvingly, they said, yeah, this is good stuff. They gave me some helpful feedback, a couple places where they made suggestions that I took. And so, yeah, it has been peer reviewed. So this nonsense about, well, creationists can't publish in scientific peer reviewed literature. Well, here it is. But I think it would have survived peer review even in a secular journal. I probably would have had to remove the creation implications, though, to get it through.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm sure that's probably the case. So, okay, so now this isn't the first. I mean, this is, I would assume, from your perspective, the biggest thing that you have seen in this data. But really, because I remember I was talking with you before Webb was even launched, going, man, this is gonna be really cool. It's gonna have all this, because I mean, Hubble was 80s, 90s tech basically, and we kept going up there when we still could, anyways. And fixing stuff and maybe improving a few things, and you had mentioned that its instrumentation was limited as far as the infrared stuff goes, and that we do have satellite observatories that have infrared capability and stuff, and that's where I know I watched a fascinating documentary on sort of the discovery of Sagittarius A star, and whipping stars around like at 1,000,000 miles per hour, and real fun stuff like that. And the only reason they can see that stuff is because they had the infrared capacity to be able to see through the dust and the dirt and everything in between here and there. So you've been obviously keeping a close eye on the data that is becoming available from Webb for a couple of years now. So, you had mentioned a couple of things that you had already observed. This is the next thing along the line. What are the secular scientists doing? I mean, don't they see that this isn't following the predictions that their models would be calling for?
Yeah, and you would think, secular scientists, well, they're just unbiased and neutral, and they're not. They have a worldview, and so they automatically filter data through their worldview. We all do this. That's the human condition. But I've predicted what I think they will say, and to some extent what they've already said. Basically, there is an assumption I've made when I plotted this data. I assumed that the typical size of a galaxy nearby is the same as a typical size far away, which is what I would expect as a biblical creationist. And I find if you assume that and you assume non-expanding space, the data fit perfectly. So the observations match. But the secularists could argue that the universe is expanding, but galaxies in the past were very tiny. They were small. Now, we already know they have the same amount of mass as nearby galaxies. The number of stars are the same. We can estimate that by their brightness of these galaxies. We already know that. So they would have to assume that the galaxies themselves somehow grow in size without gaining any mass, because they're already massive. And I think that's what they are claiming. So this is what the secularists will say. The reason those galaxies look much smaller than they should, assuming the expansion of the universe, is because they're actually really tiny. But space is expanding, trust us. That's what they're going to say. But my counter argument would be, you're saying that these two effects exactly cancel, that the magnification effect you should be seeing, which you're not, exactly cancels the growth of these galaxies. So they look like my model's right and your model's wrong. Is that what you're saying? They're going to argue for two coincidences, basically, that have aligned to make my model look correct. I think that's the only way they can get out of it.
I'm sitting here going, but what there are, I would assume there are so many well, of course, there are different kinds of galaxies, spiral galaxies and stuff like that. I understand that not every galaxy looks like every other galaxy. I get that. But if there are, for example, has it been pretty much accepted by everybody that, for example, spiral galaxies such as our own, I'm assuming Andromeda would fit into the same general category. Is there a basic assumption that they all have supermassive black holes in the center?
Yes, and there's actually pretty good evidence for that. Every galaxy we've looked at, whether it's a spiral or an elliptical, it seems to have a supermassive black hole at the center.
So, but if they're teeny tiny and you have a supermassive black hole, I'm a dummy, but that seems it seems like you're really getting desperate here, and assuming there'd be all sorts of different kinds of physics and everything else going on. And why would they then be expanding in the exact same rate? It just seems like special pleading.
It is special pleading, absolutely. And anyone who embraces Occam's razor ought to reject their explanation. But that's just my prediction. That's what they're going to go with, because the only alternative is to give up expansion of the universe, or at least the Friedmann-Lemaitre-Robertson-Walker metric, which describes that expansion. But then there's no Big Bang. You can't have a Big Bang. And I think they're going to have a real tough time giving up the Big Bang.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, because what else? What other secular it's like evolution. I mean, they know it's got problems, but what else? We don't want to admit creation. So I think that's what they're going to do. I think they're going to say that these galaxies somehow were very tiny in the past. If you think about it, they'd have to be like 10 times smaller than our galaxies, but with the same mass. 10 times in each dimension, which means they're 1,000 times denser than galaxies nearby. And for some reason, their density has decreased over time in exactly the right way to make my model look right and the Big Bang model look wrong. But that's what they're stuck with at this point.
Okay, I'm not on your level, but if you have 10 times the mass that much closer together, how does that not collapse in on itself? Why would it be expanding?
Well, there is no it wouldn't necessarily collapse in on itself, because the space between stars is enormous. I mean, we see these pictures of galaxies and it looks very crowded, but the actual space between stars is enormous. Yeah. So if you want to decrease that by a factor of 10, that's okay. That's not going to affect stars. But what is the problem is, what would be the mechanism to cause these galaxies to somehow grow in size? Bound systems systems where you have something orbiting something else.
Right.
They do not expand with the expansion of the universe, because that would violate conservation of energy. So what's causing it? They're going to have to argue somehow that galaxies interacting with each other have caused them to grow in size, but without growing in mass. But no computer simulation that I'm aware of has predicted that.
And why would it only be happening with galaxies far, far away? Why wouldn't we be able to see the same processes happening with the galaxies that are closest to us?
Well, they'd probably argue that it is. It's just so gradual that for the nearest few galaxies, you don't really see that much of an effect, I think, is probably what they'll argue. But again, I'm speculating. This is what I think they're going to respond to this, because the only alternative is to give up the Friedmann-Lemaitre-Robertson-Walker metric, and that means giving up the Big Bang.
But the real question is, do you really expect them to even acknowledge the existence of the paper and the data?
No. What's interesting, because there's one guy who is like a troll, I know he's an astronomer, and he trolls creation websites, and I was curious to see what he was going to say about this, because I know he will read it. And he posted and he said, well, this just doesn't prove the Big Bang's wrong. It just proves our idea of galaxies evolution is wrong. And I said, actually, the paper is not about galaxy evolution. It's a test of the Friedmann-Lemaitre-Robertson-Walker metric on which the Big Bang is based. I said, maybe read the paper, because I have the feeling he probably didn't. I think it was a knee-jerk reaction. So there's one troll that has responded, but it was a knee-jerk reaction. I don't think he's thought about it. So I don't know how they're going to respond, but it's out there.
Yeah,
Paper's out there for anyone to read it.
Yeah, but see, my concern these days, Jason, honestly, is there is so much data out there and so much information out there, and it seems to me that, well, if we look at the medical field that has been so horrifically impacted by money, in almost any field of academia, grants, research grants, fellowships, chairs, it's all become money, 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 money. And in Western society today, academia has just become the mouthpiece of whoever has the money to tell everybody else what to believe. And so I'm just not sure that we're living in a day where having the data out there that says, hey, look, guys, James Webb is telling us this, and it doesn't fit with your assumptions. Unless you've got the money to, get RFK Jr. to talk about it or something on CNN, they just close their eyes to it. It's scary because then when you build upon falsehoods, when you build upon errors in a model at the base, it just keeps getting worse and worse the farther you get up into the superstructure. And we're wasting time and money. I'm concerned about that. So I just really wonder if they'll just do their best to try to ignore that it's even there.
Yeah, that's an issue. It's definitely an issue. Fortunately, there's not as much of a financial incentive to defend the Big Bang specifically. So, if somebody at the university challenges the Big Bang, as long as they present another secular model, they're not going anywhere, especially if they're tenured, they're fine. They're not going to gain $33 billion either way, like certain medical companies have.
Yeah.
But in any case, so we have that as a break anyway. And then I'm doing what I can to get it out there, but I'm just one guy. So I'm appearing on different podcasts, webcasts, trying to get the information out there. But frankly, if the evolutionists, if the secularists want to stay in their echo chambers and not read creationist papers, they're welcome to do that. But frankly, at this point, they're going to get left behind when it comes to doing science, because I've made the last 3 successful predictions in terms of what James Webb would detect were creationist predictions. And I've made a 4th one with this paper. I've predicted that they're going to continue to find galaxies at higher redshifts, and the average angular diameter will be 0.2 arcseconds. That's a very specific quantitative prediction. Right. And that's 10 times smaller than what the Big Bang folks would expect. So there it is. There's the prediction. And we're just going to see what happens as the newer data come in. But I think if the secularists don't eventually get on board, they're just going to be left behind. We're the ones that are going to be doing the science in terms of making successful predictions about what James Webb and frankly, other discoveries in science.
Okay. So this has been a pretty exciting time for you, obviously. I remember you. I forget when it was. You had were using all this data that I guess is publicly available, and had discovered a planet and Jason Lisle Latonius and stuff like that. No, it's not. Rich is looking at me like, really? I was like, no. Besides, he would have taken one of the terms from one of the planets from Star Trek, and he would have named it that if he was given the right to
Vulcan.
do that. But Vulcan, that's too close. That's too close. But anyways, so it's been an exciting time. Look at all this stuff. There's more data coming. I mean, I would assume that the Webb telescope is massively booked, shall we say. I don't even know how they prioritize one project over another, or where they're looking, or what kind of, if they're doing infrared stuff or visible light, all this. There's so many things that I'm sure they want to look at, and they want to look at in different ways with this thing, that it's going to take time for all this stuff to come out. But do you already have sort of a scratch pad idea someplace of other stuff you want to be looking at as the data becomes available? That you know, you might want to go, yeah, but I don't really want to mention it to anybody. I don't know.
No, I'm good because I want to get it kind of on the record. I want to get it out there so that when they find it, they say, there we go. Yeah, you need to become a creationist if you want to do successful science.
Right.
One of the things I'd love to see is repeated observation. They may not do this, but it'd be fun to see repeated observations of deep fields looking for supernovae in these fields, exploding stars, especially type 1a supernovae, which you might not even expect. The secularists might not even expect them at that distance. I would. Because of I won't go into the details, but as a creationist, I would expect to find type 1a supernovae, and they have a very characteristic light curve, which I can predict based on the Doppler model would have a different peak than it does if the Friedmann, Lemaitre, Robertson, Walker metric is correct. If the fabric of space is expanding, the peak is different, and also the stretching of that supernova light curve. It's affected by time dilation, and that's something that I've predicted. I actually mentioned that in the technical paper. I can't remember if I repeated it in the layman summary, but in the technical paper, I predicted what type 1a supernovae, what their peak magnitude should be if they find one in James Webb Space Telescope data. But that requires multiple observations of the same field. But I think it would be a really worthwhile study. But frankly, wherever they point the thing, I predict it's gonna confirm biblical creation, because it always does. This is the history of science. The secularists continue to make wrong prediction after wrong prediction after wrong prediction. And so wherever they point it, we're going to get good information. Granted, a lot of the folks that funded the James Webb Space Telescope, most of them are not biblical creationists. A few of them are. But whatever it discovers is going to confirm God's glory. That's one of the reasons he made the universe, is to declare his glory. So I expect to see all kinds of exciting stuff. With extrasolar planets, James Webb is able to detect these and measure the chemistry on them in some cases. I predict it'll find evidence of magnetic fields on these planets, which you'd not expect if they're billions of years old. So that's just whatever it's going to find, it's going to confirm biblical creation.
Fascinating. And well, it would take too much time to get into that, but it would be very, very interesting to sometime discuss, life out there in the sense of, bacteria or things like that. They're constantly looking for that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And yet, from a creationist perspective, if God wants to make a planet just gloriously colorful with all sorts of different kinds of, bacteria and stuff like that, we're perfectly fine with something like that. They would be, about ready to, jump up and down and declare the Darwin a saint if they ran into anything like that. But that means that there's filters that are being run on the interpretation of all of this data. And are there others? Are there like organizations or just other scientists that are combing through this stuff like you are, that aren't necessarily bringing all that secular stuff to it? Or I mean, how many Jason Lisles are running around out there? I think that's probably something we need to know, one way or the other.
Yeah, there. In terms of astronomers or astrophysicists with a PhD who approach it from a biblical creationist perspective, there are really very few. At least there are very few who are out of the closet. I'm sure there are some at the university that are at a secular university that are biblical creationists, but they keep it under wraps because they don't have tenure yet. So I mean that can happen. But in terms of those of us who are doing actually doing research out there, I mean there's folks like Ron Samick, there's Danny Faulkner. There's John Hartnett, who's a physicist. I mean, they're doing Russ Humphreys that are doing good research along these lines. The nice thing about the James Webb Space Telescope, it is taxpayer funded. Thank you for contributing, even though you didn't want to. And that means the data are publicly available. So anybody who wants to research it, now that doesn't necessarily mean they're easy to access, because some of the sites where I've tried to access these data, like, could you possibly make this more confusing? Tell me this isn't a government operation, but nonetheless, it is publicly available. And so if you have the desire to analyze James Webb Space Telescope data, you can do it. And that means anybody who wants to can do it. And so that's very exciting. And that's how I was able to do this, because it is publicly available.
Well, that's really exciting. Now, I do have a question for you. What is the size of the Celestron telescope behind you?
Oh, that's my baby. That's just a little 8-inch. So
okay,
the big one that we used is a 14-inch.
Oh, I know. But see, I have a 6-inch Celestron. It looks just like that. That's what I carry in the. Actually, it's in the other room because I didn't want to leave it in the heat. But that's what I carry in the RV is because man, that thing is fast to set up. It really, really is very much. You saw my 8-inch Meade. But this thing I can set up in a matter of minutes. And that was the whole idea, was when you rarely get a clear night like at an RV park, if I can set that thing up outside my RV, everybody and their second cousin is walking around with their dogs and stuff like that. And if you've got a telescope set up and you go, yeah, come on, you want to see Jupiter? You want to see, Saturn, something like that? You can get in some great conversations. And I think I told you, I bought from your ministry a bunch of your astronomy tracks that I have in the RV. So now finding clear nights where you're not parked under a street lamp, it's sort of tough. There's no two ways about it. But when it comes to planets and stuff like that, you can have Jupiter lined up and you're still underneath the street lamp. That's not a problem. So I recognized it that orange tube is real recognizable. And yeah, that's this. I bought my grandkids have a 4-inch. I've got the 6-inch in the RV, and of course yours has to be bigger. Yeah, that's just how it works. Oh well.
But you're right. It's very portable. And in fact, when we went to see the eclipse, we went to the Path of Totality to see the eclipse earlier this year, and that's the one I brought with me. I used the projection method on it, and then once it was totally eclipsed, just looked right through it. The prominences were amazing.
Wow.
And yeah, it was like 5 minutes. I was set up. Whereas with my big telescope, 5 minutes, I don't even have the base assembled yet.
That's right. Yeah.
I don't even have all the parts out of the car yet. So that is a nice one.
And let me tell you something, folks. This man is not only an astrophysicist, he also should work for UPS, because he can put more stuff into the back of a small car, including a 10-inch, a 14-inch Dobsonian telescope. I don't even know how you do it. I mean, you must have. Everything's got to go.
All those games of Tetris were not wasted.
That's exactly right. And be able to put it together in the dark. That's the amazing part. That you haven't lost 47 little tiny screws that are very, very important, and they're left in the grass someplace. That's the amazing part. Well, sorry, I had to ask about that because I saw it and I said, yeah, I've seen that one before. Not that one, but that's what I carry in the RV. So, well, brother, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. I want to direct everybody to biblicalscienceinstitute.com. I also want to say to all the homeschoolers in the audience, we have lots of homeschoolers. I think I've made sure that my kids have all of Jason's books available to them in their homeschool library. And I think everybody else, not only all the astronomy stuff, which of course is great and really colorful and pretty, and the book on fractals and all that kind of stuff, but also, works on logic and argumentation and all that stuff. You need to go to biblicalscienceinstitute.com, get that stuff for your grandkids, your kids, however old you are. Make sure that they have the good material available to them. And we very much appreciate Jason Lisle producing all of that stuff, and look forward to what's going to be coming in the future, because I'm sure I'll still not have figured out all the stuff on this one, but there'll be more stuff to come that will leave me feeling even more stupid than I do now. So even though I get it, I just couldn't necessarily explain one aspect of it very well, because I just think you get to a certain age and your mind just goes, yeah, I don't think so. I can't burn those new pathways. It's just, we can't do it. What? Oh yeah, that line. Yeah. So anyways, thank you, brother, for taking the time to be with us, and look forward to seeing you again in the future.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me on.
All right. God bless. Bye-bye.
God bless.
All right. Well, yeah, every you should see you should see the looks on Rich's face that I've been chortling about. But I have the same feelings. It's just sort of like, I keep saying he's the smartest guy I've ever met, and he is. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. I mean, 2 months ago, I don't think it was full 2 months. We're out. Yeah, no, it's not been a full 2 months. Barely over a month. We're out in the dark. He has his 14-inch Dobsonian set up. We're looking at stuff. And he has these super duper high-end binoculars or for night vision goggles. Blah, blah, blah. Night vision goggles. And white phosphorus. I have some green phosphorus night vision goggles, which are really nice, but they're not nearly as nice as his. And he has found a way. I mean, he made it himself, found a way to attach the night vision goggles to his telescope. So you can just walk up to the telescope and look through the night vision goggles, and we were looking at, it just makes nebulae glow in the dark. I mean, it's astonishing. I actually took a little picture. I posted. I somehow managed to get my phone to where it got a semi-decent shot through his telescope with those night vision goggles, and it's astonishing stuff. But like I said, polymath, whatever terms you want to use, that's Jason, and yet so humble, just a great brother. We are very, very, very thankful to have him out there doing the things he's doing. Take advantage, please, of his information. You will find it to be exceptionally useful. I'm seeing a bunch of stuff on Twitter about the CNN interview. Have you been seeing any of this? 18 minutes long. They will not release a transcript, and they had to edit it down. The two of these people together cannot survive being interviewed by their own press for more than 18 minutes without melting down. I mean, I don't even. My wife and I have been talking a lot, far more about this election than anyone in the past. And it always ends up with both of us just putting our hands up and just going, I don't know what to say. I just don't even know what to say. And I end up always coming to the conclusion, there is a spirit of stupor. They refuse to love the truth. They are caused to love a lie. And that's the only explanation I can come up with. There are people who will look at me and go, yeah, things are really bad. It's Trump's fault, so we need to vote for Harris. And you're like, but they're in charge. They've been in charge for 3.5 years, and all this inflation and stuff. You're voting for more of it, and it's just like. And the only explanation I can come up with is judgment. Judgment. I don't want that to be the case. But I don't understand it. I really, there's a lot of things I don't understand these days. There's a lot of things I do not understand these things. It's interesting. Again, watching my mentions during the program, I'm not surprised by this, but no one's making any comments whatsoever about the program up to this point. Because I think everybody's like, that's really interesting, but I'm not going to comment on that for love nor money because I'm not sure. Look, the summary article is really good. Go to biblicalscienceinstitute.com and read it. Fundamentally, all he's saying is the data from the James Webb Space Telescope demonstrates that the fundamental assumptions that have been used for 100 years in regards to space cosmology don't add up. And that the Big Bang requires a particular conclusion that the data does not support. And the real question is, who's willing to follow the data? And we've already seen in regards to evolution, there are very few who are willing to follow the data. I mean, intelligent design is just so obvious, and yet, you're never going to get tenure. You're never going to get research grants if you don't toe the line. And it's not just in that area. If you don't toe the line in economics and history, and that's the problem once the academy becomes completely corrupted by money, power, and I suggest to you, secularism has no guardrails to stop it. In fact, secularism rewards it. It rewards it. And so that's where we are, and that's why homeschool parents, if you haven't tuned out already, homeschool parents, you have to teach your kids to demythologize scholarship. I did not say disrespect, but to demythologize it. Scholarship that produces sound, consistent conclusions is to be respected. But today, what we have is the experts say who, where, how, what methods they use. We're not allowed to ask. And so demythologizing means that you recognize that just because somebody's got a bunch of letters after their names, honestly doesn't even mean that they have common sense. It may mean that they know a whole lot about a sliver of human knowledge that wide and nothing about all the rest of it. Because the current mindset in the academy, it used to be that there was an emphasis that if you're studying this area, then to be a complete scholar, you needed to know at least something about how that area relates to the area next door and over here and over here and over here if you wanted to be a complete scholar. But that's not the case anymore. That is not the case anymore. You can get that terminal degree and be completely incapable of relating the conclusions in your field to even closely related fields, let alone the broad stretch of human knowledge. And that ends up with all the compartmentalization and all the incoherence. And it comes from secularism. You've put man in the center. Man isn't big enough to fit in the center. So you have to teach your kids to demythologize scholarship, not to be swayed quickly by, whatever the most recent article on the internet is. It used to be that there would be years of interaction and analysis and all that kind of stuff. Not anymore. Not anymore. All right, I need to make a few comments for a few minutes. I almost don't even want to look at my Twitter feed right now. It's depressing. Look, when I use all caps bold like a King James onlyist, I don't even. That means I'm at the end of my rope. I have explained in every way that I can explain it my concerns about seeing it. I'm not talking about Roman Catholics here. I understand why Roman Catholics lionized the Crusades. They were initiated by the Pope, and the Pope exercised the power of the keys to grant indulgences. And yeah, so my discussion of the topic of the Crusades with Roman Catholic is going to be completely different than my discussion with a secularist, with a Muslim. My comments over the past week or so have been directed to my fellow Protestants broadly, but much more so to Reformed men who are lionizing the Crusaders as embodying the kind of masculine bravery and, I would think, Christ-centeredness. I mean, they've got a cross on their right there, you know, that we should be seeking to emulate and create amongst our people. And part of this is the pendulum reaction to feminism. We see entire quote-unquote mainline denominations now predominantly led by women. We see the men in these denominations just neutered. And so there's a pendulum swing. And so now you've got guys with beards that are 14 feet long and they spend 14 hours in the gym, and they're jumping off cliffs with axes in their hands and stuff like that. And it's just like into the water, not into jumping off a cliff. Jumping off a cliff into the water with an axe and it's a pendulum swing. And so I started seeing, I don't know, a year and a half ago or so, these AI-generated images. You know, I've never done a single one of them. I have friends that are very good at it. I've never done a single one. I've never worn a virtual reality device. Never put one on my face, and I don't think I probably ever will. Oh, well, yeah, I can imagine. I can see you just falling over. But that's because you and I played Descent years and years ago, and you lost it, you know. But anyway, see what I have to put up with here, people? It's amazing. I'm trying to say something serious. What's this guy doing? So I started seeing this stuff, and I was like, okay. And they're all big buff guys and stuff like that. And they believe me, people coming out of medieval Europe did not look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. But I just thought, well, it's a phase. You know, I at first I didn't see people specifically, honestly arguing that the Crusades should be something that we would emulate, that there would be good, positive Christian truth to be derived from the Pope's Crusades, offensive military invasions to protect. Well, but they were protecting Christians. They were seeking to reestablish Christian control of holy sites for pilgrimages. And I don't know. I guess Reformed people do pilgrimages to Ligonier. Really not much more than that. Maybe some of the some Spurgeon folks will do pilgrimages to the Metropolitan Tabernacle, or stuff like that. But we don't really have a theology of pilgrimage and pilgrims and stuff like that. And so, I was looking at it and going, this is sort of strange. But now, what I've seen over the past week, my block list has doubled in size. sadly. I have seen astonishing hatred expressed toward Muslims. It's been sad. I have to admit that what I have seen is that amongst Reformed men, I can't see any difference in I do not see a spirit-born zeal and love to bring the gospel to the Muslim, the Mormon people either, for that matter, but to the Muslim, especially not the Muslim people. That should be the necessary result of a sound grasp of the gospel. Because we have the only message that can defeat Islam. We have the gospel is the power of God and salvation. I was astonished at how many people there were people literally saying, "You're starting to sound like John Piper." And maybe there's a burnout, thinking about maybe there's a burnout on Together for the Gospel and T4G and the Gospel Coalition and just overusing the term. But we have the only power that can change hearts and minds. Bombs can't do it. Crusaders can't do it. Horses can't do it. Airplanes can't do it. We can literally change hearts and minds. And so naive me, Chris did a search on our transcripts page on our website and came up with a couple of quotations. It's not like I've spent a whole lot of time on it. I mean, obviously I've taught church history a number of times over the years, and I've addressed the Crusades at that point. But on the dividing line, he pulled up references. One of them was, interestingly enough, right after 9/11, where I said the same things about the Crusades, had the same concerns that I have today. And so, once again, just as with the Thomism stuff, a couple of weeks ago with the Jews are behind every evil in the world stuff, now with the we all need to become Crusaders stuff, I'm right where I've been. And all of a sudden, all these folks who are saying, "We used to listen to you all the time, and I learned so much from you, but now you've just turned your back on us," and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, I haven't changed. If you listened to my church history lectures, and I've had lots of people over the years saying, "Well, man, I'm so glad I found all your church history stuff online, and man, this is fascinating." Okay, that's great. I'm glad to have been of help. But I said the same things back then that I'm saying now. And the great frustration for me, honestly, has been I could address someone who 6 years ago would have been sitting in the audience at G3 really enjoying whatever I was preaching on at that particular point in time. And if we had talked afterwards, man, we would have had a wonderful time, and they would have heard what I was saying and tracked with what my central core concerns were. Now it's just like, it's like I'm speaking a different language. Because what will come back from this group in general has to do with everything other than what I have said in my original posts, my OPs, I call it. And even though I keep coming back and saying, but I said this, are you going to respond to this? Early on I said 90% of my original post on this subject was about the theological underpinnings of the Crusades. And if you read established, proven sources, not stuff that is coming out of the modern Muslim resurgence, Islamic terrorism, ISIS, the caliphate, the current stuff now, but stuff that's been around a while. So, Philip Schaff, Nick Needham, again, standard sources that we've been referring to for, with Schaff for decades. Nick's stuff's not that old, but it's been around a while. You read what these sources say, and they deal honestly. They'll give you the quotations from the various popes. I may have to take the time to go back through and read these things and establish the theological character of the Crusades. Now, the modern books downplay that, as almost all modern historiography does. With anything. You read modern books on the Reformation, and amazingly, they will downplay the theological content. They talked about that and they used that, but there was all this other stuff actually going on, because that's how history is viewed today. My concern from the start, from the beginning, has been that the Crusades were an offensive Roman Catholic military excursion outside of the lands where Roman Catholicism predominated, which involved invasion of non-Roman Catholic lands. Won't go into this right now, but also involved negative interaction with Eastern Orthodoxy and the Byzantine Empire, and in fact weakened the Byzantine Empire. That's a whole nother area of, that's some of the historical stuff that you can have one side argue one thing, one side argues the other thing. You can do all that stuff you want to. And it's fascinating, it's interesting, but that's not been my issue. I have not sit here and said, oh man, the worst thing about the Crusades was it hastened the fall of Constantinople in 1453 because it weakened the Byzantine Empire, and because they sacked Constantinople. They did it because, this little place here, they wanted to, it's all political and it was money, and okay, all that's true. But that hasn't been what has concerned me about young Reformed men fantasizing that they're wearing armor with a big cross on it and they've got a big old sword and this is how we're gonna win back Western culture. That stuff is interesting to discuss, but isn't the issue. Here's the issue. The Pope, as the self-proclaimed vicar of Christ, utilized the power of the keys. And I think one of the problems here is most Protestants don't know anything about Roman Catholic theology. They really don't. I've come to the conclusion that for 25 years now, all the debates I've done over 30 years now with Roman Catholics, my fellow Protestants were patting me on the back saying, "You go get him, James," and they weren't listening to a word I was saying. That's my sad conclusion. There are exceptions, but for most people, it's like, power of the keys? What? Isaiah? What? Anyway, the Pope, exercising the power of the keys, raised up armies of knights and other individuals who, in that day, now, I've had people saying, you don't think there are any Christians for Martin Luther? The number of lies, absolute falsehoods, lies that I've heard about myself just over the past 3 days from people who also claim to have, I've listened to you forever, has been pretty troubling, you know? You don't think they're any Christian? What? How can you say that? It's a lie. I've said the exact opposite of that forever. How many dividing lines have I gone through Fulgentius of Rusp's materials from the 6th century and go, man, this guy was great. This is 6 centuries in. What are you talking about? There weren't any Christians till Luther. What? But you see, they confuse the real issue. And the real issue is that there is a massive amount of nominalism. And again, all these reform folks that are sitting here going, you know what? Nominalism's cool. It's better to have a society full of nominal Christians who actually don't know the gospel and are going to go to hell and are going to be more severely punished because they had access to the light, but they didn't have the gospel and they didn't know Christ, and they were encouraged in that by the church of their day. But hey, it was a better society than what we have now with drag queen story hour. Hey, you know what? All Christians know drag queen story hour is evil. They know it's evil. And I appreciate when a culture has, still has some connection to light from the past that keeps things from being really, really bad. It doesn't change the fact that centuries and centuries of tradition-crippled gospel, tradition-encrusted gospel, priests, no such thing in the New Testament. There are no sacramental priests in the New Testament. Go listen to my debate with Mitch Pacwa. We've dealt with these things for years. Priesthoods, sacramental penance, rejustification, the whole controlling of the grace of God through the sacraments of the church. This period of time is exactly where transubstantiation began to develop. Aristotle's categories were brought in. You start seeing the Eucharistic miracles right after the turn of the millennium. And so you have the biblical teaching of the once for allness, the finished work of Christ, even an Augustinian emphasis upon the existence of the elect. All that stuff encrusted by tradition and a concept of merit before God. And that's the only way you can sell people on leaving family and lands and traveling across Europe, walking, riding, whatever, to a foreign land, because the Pope has promised that if you die in battle against the infidel, you will have eternal life. It's a false gospel. We all used to agree with that. We all used to agree with that. I thought all of us Reformed folks, we recognized you can't sell God's forgiveness on the basis of you're going on pilgrimages. We all agree. Oh, yeah, you can't do it by going on pilgrimages. You can't do it by buying indulgences. But put a cross on your armor and die, and that's okay. We'll let that one slide. And I go, no, we can't do that. And so you have a man who claims to be something he's not, the Bishop of Rome, Pope, offering that which he does not possess, eternal life, the mechanism thereof, to people who in the vast majority of situations do not know the gospel. Do I believe there were Christians then? Yes. But the vast majority of those people who could be fooled into thinking that their righteousness before God could be determined by going and killing the infidel have been given a false gospel. They don't know the scriptures. That most vast majority of people didn't know the scriptures at that time. I mean, it's still going to be right at 300 years time period where, before Wycliffe is translating the Bible into English, and he's attacked because you can't have people reading the Bible in their own language. They've got to have the guidance of the church, and so I don't blame them for being deceived, but it's still deception. I thought us Reformed folks, didn't we think that indulgences are deceptive? I mean, can we just think back to just last October? Did any of you, put up a image of Luther nailing the 95 Theses to the Wittenberg door? Maybe, possibly. Didn't we all agree that the Pope's not the vicar of Christ, and that indulgences are wrong, and that the theology behind this is the real issue? That's what I've always thought. That I'm discovering I was naive. That I was sort of out there alone. Because when I raise these issues, and then I go and add, wow, there was really no concern whatsoever about reaching the Muslim people with the gospel. And there wasn't. You can try to make that up if you want to. I've seen people trying to say, oh, well, that opened up opportunities for missionaries and stuff like that. Who? What were they preaching? Those armies were not concerned about the conversion. They weren't trained with the best arguments against Islam, which Rome wouldn't be able to offer anyways, because they had encrusted the key portions of the gospel with unbiblical traditions. So, a horrible, heartbreaking examples over and over again over the past few days that I've seen of people demonstrating they have no desire at all to be used of Christ to bring Muslims to the truth. None. They just look at the Muslims as a whole group to be hated. I saw it over and over again. And that's what you ended up with in the Crusades. They're just the infidel. You hack them to pieces. You burn their cities. You kill their women. There are lots of... Muslims have done horrible things to Christians, and Christians have done horrible things to Muslims. And it has not helped. And actually, the church has the one power. But you see, that takes patience. That takes discipline. That takes time. That takes the perspective. See, one of the things that I've seen here, there is a vast difference between my believing that the Son has asked the Father for the nations as his inheritance and will be given the nations as his inheritance. The Puritans had a post-millennial hope, and they did not expect to see the fulfillment of that hope in their lifetime. That's why they built stuff. That's why they invested. That's why they were patient, long-suffering. The kind of quote-unquote Christian nationalism represented by Stephen Wolfe, Thomistic, sacral, anti-postmillennial, anti-theonomic, anti-presuppositional. And man, are we seeing what that means. Man, are we seeing what that means. And I'm seeing people who had started more on my side moving that direction. Because you see, here's the issue. The Puritans prayed, worked, labored with joy for a future generation in which they were convinced you would see the fulfillment of those massive promises of the nations desiring the law of God. But they knew it was going to happen in their lifetime. Especially in Western culture, we have become so completely wedded to instant satisfaction. It's got to be now. We don't think about our great-great-grandchildren. And the idea of me spending my energy, my money, my life in service of them? Why? And yet that's what we're called to. That's what I believe we're called to. And so I get the allurement. I get isn't this exciting? This gives us something to do. And then the hatred that some of these guys have of boomers. I mean, Andrew Torba went after me. I'm not overly impressed with Mr. Torba. I mentioned, and I have saved it, and we will, if it works out to do so, if other stuff hasn't happened, I do want to look at what he wrote to me as an incredible illustration of scripture twisting, how to use scripture, not in its original context, but in the context you want to transport into, to support whatever current political push you're working. But these folks, there is a deep, and people are purposefully seeking to create this, a deep detestation of those who have come before. And I've tried to, I've had a couple of people saying, well, obviously you just live in the academic ivory tower. I've never been in the academic ivory tower, never sought to be in it. And it was pretty easy. I just posted pictures back to the guy of me standing in foreign countries, in mosques with Muslims, talking about the gospel, defending the gospel, right there in person. That's not the academic ivory tower. The academics don't do that. I have. So this detestation of those who come before, it's a massive sign of immaturity. And I keep saying to myself, 10, 15, 20 years from now, if I even live that long, I'm going to be hearing from a lot of these folks. Because you eventually grow out of this stuff, and you eventually realize what's really going on, and it's like, oh, wow, did I really do that kind of stuff back then? Yeah, I guess I did. Y'all are talking about, we need leaders. In what? Leaders in what? What do you want to be led into? My experience is until certain things happen in your life to where you recognize the need of maturity, that you will resent those who direct you to self-denial, discipline, working selflessly toward the future, and you'll instead go toward the quick fulfillment, makes me feel really good. I feel like I've done something. And see, that's worldly. That comes from the flesh. Some of the best leaders you're going to find are going to be found in the best history books. It was only a few months ago I was reading to you from the works of Adoniram Judson. And from the world's perspective, here's a man who gave himself. He was imprisoned. He suffered. He was hungry. He was ill. He was sick. Most of his compatriots died of diseases. Ministering the gospel in lands that still have tiny little churches. Adoniram Judson would never understand what on earth is going on today on social media. He wouldn't understand it. He would have no categories because his was a life of service. And it's a service that is based on self-denial. Take up your cross. Taking up your cross and following Jesus was joining the death march. It wasn't putting your cross on your armor to go murder the infidels. Oh, it was just military. Well, look, and I do need to address something else. I'm sorry if I'm going long here, but the fact of the matter is it's a whole lot easier to do this than type. And the typing hasn't accomplished anything for me, so I'm do it here. I've had a lot of people say, oh, you must be a pacifist. And they've said, you must agree with John Piper that if someone breaks into your home, you should just let them do whatever they want. I posted a couple times my article from, what was that, 2008-ish? Maybe even earlier than that. I forget when it was. Where I addressed this very issue. Yeah, I did a dividing line. Okay. I don't remember that, but I think you're right. And I said, I said, no, I'm not. There's stuff going on in our country right now. I was just up in Colorado, and now I'm seeing these videos of these gangs, just part of the millions and millions and millions and millions of invaders that we have purposefully let into our country to change the nature of our country because we've been taken over by our enemies. We are led by traitors. We are led by traitors to our own destruction. These gangs, they just trashed a Target. I have to wonder if I haven't been to that Target. I've been to a lot of Targets up in Denver and Aurora. And people are like, so you just think we should let these people rape our daughters and our wives and all the rest of this stuff? Like I said, the number of lies that have been said about me just over the past couple of days is just pretty astonishing. No, I do not believe so. The video of the Muslim man, at least I didn't hear him saying Allahu Akbar, but he seemed to be speaking a Middle Eastern language, that stabbed and killed the man in Birmingham in the UK. Right on video, and they're mocking him as he's bleeding out and dying. Slash his throat. That man needs to be executed. That's justice. It won't happen in the UK because they don't do things like that. They don't understand justice anymore. And that man should have had the capacity to defend his life against that attacker. You say, well, so that's what the Crusades were. No, it wasn't. That's the whole point. That's not what the Crusades were. This wasn't a defensive war. People have said, well, we're just simply defending Christendom. Well, there's another problem with Christendom. Because it seems like Christendom 2.0 is just Christendom 1.0 microwaved. It's back to sacralism again. But no, I believe that I have a duty, not just a right, but a duty, to protect my wife from an attacker. You smash out the bedroom window in the middle of the night, and you better be ready to meet your maker. Okay? Because we're not talking about the same thing here. I'm not putting a cross on my chest and saying, I shoot thee in the head in the name of Jesus Christ, for thy good and mine as well. No, you have an evil, this is the, Jesus used the parable of the strong man. Okay? And you can't break into the strong man's home unless you bind the strong man. And he wasn't saying there's something wrong with the strong man. And if you can be so confused as to think that that means that it was appropriate to offer salvation to people who cross a continent to murder the infidel, to protect quote-unquote holy sites, then you're very confused. Now, when you get in the whole area of self-defense, where do you draw the line? There was a guy, I have him muted, but I saw it because I was following another line, but going, well, where do you draw the line? What if there's 10 people attacking your house, or 100 people, or 1,000,000 people? And so this goes to just war theory. But again, connecting the cross to the army in the sense of saying, if you're in this army, and this has happened over and over again, it happened during the wars of religion in Europe. If you're saying, if you're in this army, you get eternal life. If you're in that army, you go to hell. There's the issue. And there can be disagreements amongst Christians as to exactly where you do draw the line. And there can be disagreements amongst Christians. What if you live in a free land that is being betrayed by its leaders? In comparison to the early church that was in a non-free empire, used whatever freedom they had to proclaim the gospel, but you did not have the Bill of Rights. You did not have the Second Amendment. Where is the line drawn? And there are disagreements amongst Christians where it is, but there should not be any disagreements amongst Reformed Christians that there is no reason to lionize the Crusades if you recognize their theological nature, their historical source, and the impact that they had upon the gospel. And those of you who have mocked me for making reference to the gospel, what do you offer in place of it? What's going to be your ultimate good if the gospel isn't it? I'm really concerned that what we're going to see is we're going to see people have gone, I started my studies in these things thinking that Roman Catholicism was what I had heard in church from Martin Luther and the evil Pope. And I've come to discover that there's a whole lot more to it than that. And this Christendom thing sounds like a really cool idea. But the only way to have Christendom is to have a Pope. And I've been watching Roman Catholics who are watching this going, come on home. Come on home. Just, you're paddling around out there in the Tiber. Come on home. Now, what's going to happen is everything else I've said about the atonement, the gospel, stuff like that, you're going to forget about all that. Because I just said I have a concern that I could see this happening. And that's all you're going to focus on. I just know it. I see what's out there. And so there is a calm, collected discussion on the subject. Someone's asking if I got a shirt. I'll bet you that must have been the shirt that I took home, the Life Behind Bars. Yeah. So I'll have to respond to him. Anyways, sorry about that. Okay, spent a lot of time on that. Have to get home, have a church function this evening. Yes, next week. I think I'll have gotten through that book, so I can't announce any special guests or anything next week, but I am trying to deal with other topics. The crusade stuff, I don't want to delve into it even more because the resources are there. The sermons and there's a lot of history you can dig into that I could demonstrate the utter theological aberrations of all of it. I don't want to do that, but if I have to, maybe that's what we'll end up doing. But I think there are much more important things going on that are foundational to how we're going to resist in the not too distant future, when this program won't exist. That day's coming. I would like to have a few more years. Maybe it won't exist because Rich and I finally just get so old we can't figure out how to get the computer started. Rich is almost there. That line. Tired light, tired dividing line. I like the tired light model. Not for scientific reasons, but just like I understand this. What? Yeah. That day's coming. Unless God turns this nation around in a miraculous fashion. When I look at Kamala Harris, when I look at Waltz, these are people. I mean, we haven't even talked about the Facebook letter, the admission that everything we were saying starting in 2020 was spot on. We were right. And they're admitting it now. Yes.
You know that we still have a strike against us on YouTube.
Yep.
For that one program that we snuck through. And then we went and took all those COVID programs and moved them over to Odyssey.
Yep.
But by the way, we did put them back once we got on X. So those got all moved over to X and relinked.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, but it's true. And the strike was for playing, because they had their bots looking for it, was playing the audio of a woman talking about the dangers of the mRNA vaccines. It wasn't what I said. It was because I dared play someone promoting that. And of course, it's all been proven true. The data is overwhelming, but we still have the strike. And we always will. Because that's the nature of censorship. It's coming. So when you can't be constantly being encouraged by programs like this and the many others that are out there, you need to have a solid foundation in scriptures. So one of the things that we are going to be talking about is, I think, a very dangerous movement within Christian apologetics of eroding the foundations of confidence in the inerrancy and inspiration of Scripture. So that's something I've been working on. That's long-term important. I think it's more long-term important than the dust-ups on social media. But these dust-ups are exposing some real foundational problems. They really, really are. And so that's why we discussed them. All right. Thank you for watching the program today. It's been a long one. We will see you next time. Pray for us. God bless.